Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into something you probably heard about, maybe seen pictures of, but, well, maybe you don't have the full story. We're talking about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Ah, yes, the GPGP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that image, the one that comes to mind, this massive, floating continent made entirely of plastic bottles and bags.
A literal island of trash. Yeah.
That back picture. It's largely a myth. It's catchy, for sure, gets attention, but it really obscures what's actually going on out there in the North Pacific.
It does. It misses the nuance entirely. What we're actually dealing with is more like a huge swirling zone where ocean currents trap debris.
Like a giant whirlpool.
Sort of, yeah. It's technically a gyre, specifically in the North Pacific Subtropical Convergence Zone, and the currents pull in debris from, well, all around the Pacific Rim.
So Asia, North America, South America.
Yeah.
It all potentially ends up there.
That's the thinking, yes.
Okay, so our mission for you today, our deep dive goal, is to really get past those sensational headlines. We want to understand what this patch is actually made of, because that seems critical.
Absolutely.
And then where's all this plastic coming from? The sources seem complex. And finally, what's the real story with cleanup? How much progress are we actually making? Let's unpack it. All right, first things first, let's tackle that island myth head on. If I took a boat out there right into the middle of the GPGP, what would I see?
Honestly, probably not much. Maybe some scattered debris here and there, but you wouldn't feel like you're sailing through a landfill.
So no navigating around giant piles of garbage.
Definitely not. It's not visible from space, despite what some reports might imply. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they consistently point out the name patch is misleading for exactly this reason. You can't walk on it. It's not solid.
Okay, so why is it so hard to see if it's supposed to be this massive problem?
It comes down to density. The concentration of plastic is actually very low. On average, maybe 4 particles per cubic meter of water. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but generally quite diffuse.
4 particles? That doesn't sound like much in a whole cubic meter.
It isn't, relatively speaking. And that low density is precisely why satellites can't detect it. There's just not enough concentrated mass in one spot from that high up.
So what is it made of then, if not big chunks?
The vast majority, by count anyway, is microplastics, tiny pieces. Often smaller than your fingernail, sometimes truly microscopic, just sort of suspended there, mostly in the upper part of the water column.
Like a plastic soup or confetti, as you said.
Exactly. A very, very large area of plastic soup.
Which brings us to the scale, because even if it's diffuse, the area it covers is just mind-boggling. What's the latest estimate?
The commonly cited figure is around 1.6 million square kilometers.
Okay, numbers like that are hard to grasp. Put that into perspective for us.
Right. Think about the size of Texas. Now double it. That's roughly the area we're talking about.
Twice the size of Texas.
Or if you prefer European geography, it's about 3 times the size of France.
Wow. Okay. That's enormous. An invisible continent almost.
In a way, yes. And this is where we hit a really critical point, something that fundamentally changes how we should think about the problem and the solutions.
Which is?
It's the difference between the number of plastic pieces and the total weight or mass of the plastic.
Explain that. How can they be different in a meaningful way?
Well, think about those microplastics we just discussed. Because they're so tiny, there are trillions of them. The estimate is around 1.8 trillion individual pieces floating in the GPGP.
1.8 trillion?
Yeah, an almost incomprehensible number. And those tiny microplastics make up about 94% of that total count. So if you're just counting pieces, it's overwhelmingly microplastic.
Okay, that makes sense. 94% microplastic by count.
And this is the crucial but, when you stop counting and start weighing, the picture flips completely.
How so?
Suddenly, those tiny microplastics account for only about 8% of the total mass.
Only 8%. So what makes up the other 92% of the weight?
Larger objects, much larger. We're talking about discarded fishing gear, fragments of crates, bottles, containers, even things like toothbrushes and cigarette lighters. Some pieces have been dated back over 50 years.
50 years. So things tossed out in the 70s are still floating around, making up the bulk of the weight.
Precisely. And also, nurdles, those small plastic pellets used in manufacturing, they contribute too. So while the patch is numerically dominated by tiny fragments, it's physically dominated by weight, by larger, often industrial or commercial debris.
That is a huge distinction. It completely changes where you might focus cleanup efforts, doesn't it?
It absolutely should. And it ties into the accumulation rate. The estimation that the patch has grown roughly tenfold each decade since about 1945.
Tenfold per decade.
That rapid growth, combined with the mass being mostly larger items, points towards specific heavy-duty sources.
Okay, that leads perfectly into the next big question. If 92% of the weight is these larger, older items, where's it all coming from? Because the common story I hear is mostly about, plastic bags and bottles washing off land.
Right, and that's been the dominant narrative for a while. The general estimate often quoted is something like 80% land-based sources, 20% marine sources like ships.
80-20.
And some earlier studies looking at data from maybe 2010 or so did seem to support that. They pointed towards debris floating eastward, primarily from several Asian countries. China, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Sri Lanka were often mentioned. China, at that point, was estimated to contribute around 30% of all ocean plastic pollution globally.
So that seems to fit the land-based idea. Litter washing into rivers, then out to sea.
It does, partially. But remember the weight issue. If the patch is predominantly heavy, durable items by mass, does that fit with lightweight consumer packaging being the main culprit?
Maybe not entirely.
Yeah.
A plastic bag doesn't weigh much compared to, say, a fishing net.
Exactly. And this is where the story takes a really significant turn, backed by more recent research focusing specifically on the GPGP's composition.
Okay, what did they find?
A major study in 2018 really shifted the focus. It analyzed the actual debris collected from the patch and found that nearly half, almost 50% of the total mass was composed of synthetic fishing nets.
Half. Just from fishing nets.
Just from fishing nets, often called ghost nets because they're lost or abandoned but continue floating and trapping marine life. The ocean currents in that gyre are particularly effective at accumulating this kind of durable, heavy gear.
So, wait a minute. If almost half the weight is fishing nets, that 80-20 land versus sea split seems completely wrong for the GPGP's mass.
It appears to be, yes. At least for the mass concentrated in the patch itself. The sources contributing the weight seem heavily skewed towards marine activities, specifically fishing.
Has other research backed this up? That sounds like a huge finding.
It does, yes. Further studies, particularly around 2022, reinforce this. They analyzed the types of plastic found and concluded that anywhere from 75% up to maybe 86% of the plastic mass in the GPGP originates from fishing and, to some extent, aquaculture activities.
75 to 86%. That basically flips the old narrative on its head. It's not mostly land runoff, it's mostly industrial gear lost at sea.
It strongly suggests that, yes. For the mass component, the primary sources appear to be industrialized fishing nations operating extensively in the North Pacific.
Which countries are we talking about?
The studies point towards major fishing economies in the region: Japan, China, South Korea, Taiwan, and also the United States.
The U.S., too. Interesting. So it's not just one region's problem?
No, it appears linked to large-scale industrial fishing activity from several key nations bordering or operating within the Pacific.
And beyond nets, what other specific items point to this?
Well, analysis of the recovered hard plastic objects identified, besides unidentifiable fragments, things directly related to fishing and aquaculture. Items like fish storage boxes, oyster spacers used in shellfish farming nets, ropes, and even eel traps.
Very specific gear.
Very specific. And then there was the language analysis. Researchers looked at markings and text on over 200 identifiable plastic objects they pulled from the patch.
What did they find?
The most common languages found printed on the debris were, in order, Chinese, then Japanese, then English, and then Korean.
Which lines up almost perfectly with the major fishing nations identified.
It provides strong corroborating evidence, yes, linking the physical debris back to the primary industrial activities and nations operating in that part of the ocean.
Okay, so we have this massive diffuse patch, mostly microplastics by count, but overwhelmingly heavy fishing gear by weight. The environmental impact is usually framed as, turtles choking on bags, birds tangle in nets, straightforward harm.
And that is absolutely happening, tragically. Ingestion and entanglement are major threats from this debris.
But I understand there's another, perhaps more complex, environmental effect emerging.
Yeah.
Something unexpected.
Yes, that's right. Because this plastic persists for so long and it provides a stable floating surface in the middle of the open ocean, it's actually started to create its own kind of biology.
Its own biology, what do you mean?
Researchers have identified what they're now calling the plastosphere. It's essentially a new, unnatural ecosystem that has developed on the surface of the floating plastic debris.
An ecosystem living on the garbage.
In essence, yes. The plastic fundamentally disrupts the natural open ocean environment, but it also provides a substrate, a place for certain organisms to attach and live where they otherwise couldn't.
Huh. Like what kind of organisms?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. A study published in 2023 found that this plastic debris is hosting coastal species. Things like certain types of anemones, hydroids similar to jellyfish, crustaceans, even sponges that normally live near the shorelines.
Coastal species, living hundreds, maybe thousands of miles out in the open ocean.
Exactly. They seem to be surviving, feeding, and even reproducing successfully out there on the plastic rafts. And they're living side by side with the species that naturally inhabit the open ocean.
That sounds unnatural.
It is. Scientists are calling these neopelagic communities, neo meaning new, pelagic meaning open ocean. It's an artificial mixing of ecosystems.
What are the implications of that, besides just being weird?
Well, it raises significant ecological questions. Are these coastal species becoming invasive in the open ocean? Are they competing with the native pelagic species for food or resources? It's a whole new layer of disruption caused by the plastic.
Wow. Okay, and before we even get to the cleanup challenges, let's just state the toxicity ratio again.
Okay.
Heard something staggering about plastic versus plankton.
Yes, the estimates are stark. Within the gyre, the concentration of plastic is so high that, by weight, there's roughly 6 pounds of plastic for every 1 pound of plankton.
6 pounds of plastic for every pound of plankton. Plankton being the absolute base of the marine food web.
The very foundation, yes. That ratio highlights a catastrophic imbalance. It's not just inert debris, it's fundamentally altering the ecosystem's composition at its most basic level.
Which brings us to a real irony, doesn't it? If this plastic, this pollution, is now hosting this established, thriving plastisphere, these neopelagic communities, what happens if we clean it up?
That's the difficult question. It creates a genuine dilemma, both morally and operationally.
How so?
If we aggressively remove the floating plastic, which we absolutely need to do to address the pollution, the chemical leaching, the ingestion risks, we are simultaneously removing the habitat for this newly established life.
So cleaning the pollution might mean destroying an ecosystem, albeit an unnatural one.
Potentially, yes. The plastic is an invasive structure that is now supporting potentially invasive life. So the decision becomes which problem takes precedence: the long-term threat of the plastic itself or the short-term disruption of a functioning, if artificial, community. There are no easy answers. It's a complex consequence we created.
Okay, so let's pivot to cleanup. We've got this immense patch, invisible yet vast, mostly microplastic pieces but heavy with fishing gear, toxic ratio to plankton, and now it's even got its own ecosystem clinging to it. Given all that complexity, what does cleanup even look like? What actual progress has been made?
Well, the early stages, going back maybe 15 years or so, were really about understanding the problem. Expeditions like Junk Raft, Project Kaizai, the Sepal X voyages, they were crucial for surveying, sampling, and just figuring out if large-scale cleanup was even feasible.
Laying the groundwork.
Exactly. But in terms of actual removal efforts, things have definitely accelerated more recently. There are several key players making tangible progress.
Like who?
One group is the Ocean Voyages Institute. They've had some significant successes using, interestingly, traditional sailing vessels.
Sailing vessels. Why sailing?
It's lower carbon, potentially lower cost, and they focus specifically on locating and removing large accumulations of debris, especially those massive ghost nets, which contribute so much to the weight.
Targeting the heavy stuff.
Right. They actually set a record back in 2020. Across 2 expeditions that year, they pulled out 170 short tons. That's about 340,000 pounds of plastic debris, mostly nets.
170 tons in 1 year with sailing ships. That's impressive.
It really is. It shows that different approaches can yield results. But of course, the most widely publicized effort is probably the ocean cleanup, or TOC.
Right. They get a lot of attention. They started deploying their first big system back in 2018, didn't they? System 001.
They did, and it's been an iterative process for them. System 001 had its challenges, but they learned from it, adapted the technology, and moved on to System 002 and now System 03.
Learning and improving the tech as they go.
Precisely. That adaptation seems key. They hit a significant milestone in July 2022, announcing they'd removed their first 100,000 kilograms, that's about 110 short tons, using System 002.
Okay, 100,000 kilograms. That sounds like a lot.
It is. And they then transitioned to System 03, which they describe as being much larger, more efficient, and better able to capture that heavier debris that might be deeper in the water column.
And what are the latest results from System 03?
The most recent update we have from around November 2024 is that the ocean cleanup reported reaching a cumulative total of 20 million kilograms of trash removed from the GPGP since they began.
20 million kilograms.
Wow.
Okay, that's a massive number. 20,000 metric tons. It sounds like real substantial progress.
And it absolutely is. It's a phenomenal engineering achievement and a huge amount of harmful plastic removed from the ocean. It demonstrates that the technology can work at scale. We have to acknowledge that.
I sense a but coming.
Well, it's just about maintaining perspective on the sheer scale of the problem. Even as the ocean cleanup announced that incredible 20 million kilogram figure, they themselves provided the crucial context.
Which was?
They reported that this 20 million kilograms, impressive as it is, represents approximately 0.5%, half of 1% of the total estimated mass of plastic currently accumulated in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Half of 1%.
Yes. So while removing 20 million kilos is fantastic, there's still roughly 99.5% of the estimated total mass out there.
Wow. Okay. That really puts the staggering challenge into perspective. Even with these cutting-edge efforts, we've barely scratched the surface of the accumulated mess.
It underscores that cleanup, while vital and increasingly effective, cannot be the only solution. We have to address the sources too. Hashtag tag outro.
Right, so let's try to bring this all together. We started with the myth of a solid trash island, but the reality is far more complex. The Great Pacific Garbage Patch, it's not really visible, spread over an area twice the size of Texas. By particle count, it's overwhelmingly tiny microplastics.
Trillions of them.
But by weight, by mass, it's dominated 92% by larger, heavier debris, mostly discarded fishing gear from major industrialized fishing nations.
That's the key takeaway on composition and source, yes.
And environmentally, it's not just passively polluting, it's actively creating a new, unnatural ecosystem, the plastosphere, raising all sorts of ecological questions.
The neopelagic communities, yeah. A truly unexpected consequence.
And the cleanup. It's happening. Organizations like Ocean Voyages Institute and especially the Ocean Cleanup are making real, measurable progress, removing millions of kilograms. The tech is improving.
Absolutely. Tangible results are being achieved.
But even those massive removal numbers currently represent only a tiny fraction, like 0.5%, of the total estimated garbage out there.
Yeah.
The scale of what remains is just immense.
It truly is. Which brings us back to the bigger picture, perhaps a final thought to leave with you, the listener.
Go ahead.
We talked about how plastic pollution, broadly, seems to have increased tenfold each decade since the mid-20th century. We identified that the mass in the GPGP is largely industrial fishing waste from specific nations, including the U.S., which is also cited as a major contributor to coastal plastic pollution generally.
Right.
Now consider this. In recent years, after China bans the import of plastic waste, where did a lot of that waste from developed nations, including the U.S., start going? Often to other countries like Indonesia or Vietnam, which sometimes have less developed waste management infrastructure. So the provocation is this. If we're exporting our plastic waste problem to regions potentially less equipped to handle it, and we know land-based sources do contribute to overall ocean plastic, even if not the GPGP's mass, what does this global shell game of waste mean for the future accumulation in existing garbage patches, or even the formation of new ones? Are we just shifting the input locations?
That's a heavy question about global responsibility and waste management, going way beyond just fishing nets.
It connects the consumer side, the industrial side, and the global policy side. Preventing the next 20 million kilograms requires tackling all of it.
A critical point. We really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer, more nuanced picture of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, moving beyond the myth to the complex reality of microplastic counts versus industrial mass, the surprising ecosystem, and the monumental scale of the cleanup still ahead. That distinction between count and mass feels absolutely crucial. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.